This morning is the beginning of the social media industry's big tobacco moment. That's what legal experts are calling the trials that are opening today in Los Angeles. These trials are going to ask not, whether staying up all night doom scrolling is bad for you. They're going to ask who decided to make this stuff addictive in the first place and what they knew about the dangers of doing so when they made that choice. I'm Jake Ward. This is The Rip Current. It's Monday, February 9th. We look at the big invisible forces shaping our lives. And social media is one that I've covered for a long time, decades now. And I've had this photo up on my wall throughout the day. And really over the weekend. It is a photograph of moms who staged a protest on the steps of the Los Angeles County Superior Courthouse on February 5th. These are moms of teens that they say were terribly harmed by social media, and that they say social media companies basically ignored the threat to, even as their kids fell into body dysmorphia, suicidal ideation, and eventually self-harm. So the trials that are opening right now are a pair of trials, really, that are going to determine the future of social media for all time. And it really is a big tobacco moment. The big question ends up being here: how did these companies make the choices to build their product the way they did? And what dangers did they knew those choices may have posed to all of us when they made those kinds of choices? So opening arguments are starting this morning in Los Angeles Superior Court. And that, and at the same time, there are also opening arguments beginning today in New Mexico, where the state attorney general is suing Meta for, he claims, failing to protect children from sexual exploitation. And in both of these cases, these are bellwether trials, right? These are trials that are going to influence what are basically another 1,500 or more similar lawsuits, hundreds of school district claims, and cases from more than 40 state attorneys general, all of which are going to, according to Meta, which warned in its October filings, they said that the damages here could reach the high tens of billions of dollars. These are going to be extremely important in determining what happens in the future of social media and whether these companies are basically allowed to say still stay, as they have always said, the behavior of human beings as it is expressed on our platform is not up to us to police. It is, we just provide an open bulletin board for people to post their lives and their thoughts on. And what results from that is not our responsibility, except in as much as we make it possible for people to do so. So this is choice architecture meeting corporate accountability. And I want to explain the stakes of it in a moment. But first, let's start with what the big trial, the Los Angeles trial, consists of. So this is a case where there is a 19-year-old plaintiff known as KGM. Those are her initials. And she is a now 20-year-old woman, and her lawyers are going to argue that addictive features harmed her mental health. That's the case that they've made in their opening statement so far. And this is a case against Meta and YouTube. So this is both Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube implicated here. Snapchat and TikTok were also implicated at one point, but they have settled. And these other companies are now going to trial. So her mother and the plaintiff accuse these companies of intentionally creating addictive platforms that caused her to develop anxiety and body dysmorphia and suicidal thoughts. And what they are essentially alleging here is that her experience is an incredibly powerful and totemic example of how everyone is experiencing social media, especially as young people. And this, the thing here that is so powerful is how unimaginable this kind of court case was even a few years ago because of Section 230. And you should understand what that is before we go any further. So Section 230 of the 1996 Telecommunications Act is a section that basically says that a company that creates a platform on which ideas are posted on the internet is not responsible for those ideas. They're just responsible for the platform and its functionality. And this is how social media companies are able to let people say crazy things without being held to account. I've worked in publishing for a long time where if I post people saying crazy things, I can be held accountable for the damages that might come from that. But social media companies have gotten away with it for all this time because of Section 230. Now, there are many good faith legal scholars who say, and journalists who say, that Section 230 is the lifeblood of the internet, that you can't have a free and open exchange of information unless you have a blanket protection for these companies. But what we have seen is a much finer slicing of Section 230 than that. There was another Bellwether case against a site called Backpage that was essentially a classifieds page for that you would see, the kind of thing that you might see in the back of a weekly magazine once upon a time. And what it turned out it was doing was facilitating, knowingly, an incredible amount of prostitution and other illegal activity. And that site eventually got taken down after big lawsuits like the ones that we're seeing against Meta and YouTube that basically said these guys knew what was going on the platform and they facilitated it anyway. And what we have seen, and if you've seen other footage of mine, other coverage of mine, you saw last week we went through a lot of the documents that have already leaked from here. You are seeing a very clear pattern of people understanding, and inside these companies, the effects that these products are having on the people around them. And that, of course, is creating this very powerful feeling among the plaintiffs that they might really have a case here in going up against these big giants. And so you have these very powerful images, these plaintiffs coming out. This is Joanne Bogard. She is the mother of Wade Bogard, an Indiana teen. And she says, like all these moms do, that she's part of this vigil for her son, who she says committed suicide after spending too much time on social media and being subjected to all sorts of terrible treatment on that platform. And what we know from the documents that we saw and that we covered last week, these companies have done extensive research that show they know about bullying, they know about comparative thinking, they know about body dysmorphia, they know a lot about what's going on these platforms. And the internal reporting and research that they have done shows that there is clearly that understanding at all levels of the company. And that is why the really amazing thing is we're going to see the testimony, in theory, of the leaders of these companies. So Mark Zuckerberg, Adam Mosseri, head of Instagram, and Neil Mohan, head of YouTube, are all supposed to take the stand in this case. These are leaders who, until now, have been able to settle typically and get out of this, but especially because these are state attorneys general in the case of New Mexico, you can't settle with the state in the same way that you can against a plaintiff. And the lawyers for these folks really don't seem inclined to settle with the big boys here, with these three companies, or at least these two companies, Meta and YouTube, and are instead eager, they say, to go all the way with this stuff. And said so from the plaintiff's lawyer, what this guy, Mark Lanier, says during jury selection. He said, "I think that we will be able to show you evidence that indicates Instagram and YouTube created certain design features to keep young users like KGM engaged for as long as possible. She became consumed by these platforms. Her mental health declined. Her childhood, and hence her adulthood, deviated from a normal path." And what I think is, what I'll be so interested to see is who are the experts they're going to bring into this, because what we have seen increasingly is very powerful. There's been very powerful testimony about social media from all sorts of experts, even though we don't clearly have a scientific consensus as to the effect of social media. People have pointed to a recent study as somehow proving that there is no connection between social media and the mental health problems of young people. But what experts I've talked to point out is that it is very, very difficult to study this right now, not least because everybody is on social media. It's very difficult there is no control group to find. In fact, Australia, where they have banned social media for kids under the age of 16, is going to be the only place in the world where you could conceivably do this. Spain is also looking at doing this kind of ban. I mean, this is a moment when there is a real reckoning going on with this stuff. And there's some very amazing testimony that was put in front of Congress in 2023 by Mitch Prinstein, who's the chief science officer at the American Psychological Association, and he has all kinds of amazing things to say about it. One is this notion that I'm going to read you a little bit of his testimony because it's such an interesting thing. He says, at the outset of puberty, adolescents' brains begin developing in a specific predetermined sequence. Generally, subcortical areas shared with many mammalian species mature before areas at the top layer of the brain. So this is what you and I have talked about. We know if you've ever spent time with a teenager, or for any of us who remember what it was like to be a teenager, it is that feeling that your brain isn't quite there. It can do a lot of the functionality, but it can't quite regulate itself, right? That your impulse control isn't quite there yet. And among these, this is back to Mitch Prinstein and what he said, among these initial areas developing among most youth, typically starting at the ages of 10 to 12 years old, are regions associated with our craving for social rewards, such as visibility, attention, and positive feedback from peers. In contrast, regions involved in our ability to inhibit our behavior and resist temptations, i.e. the prefrontal cortex, right, do not fully develop until early adulthood, approximately 10 to 15 years later. That means not until you are 20 to 25 years old. In other words, when it comes to youth's cravings for social attention, they are, quote, all gas pedal with no brakes. Adolescence, Prinstein says, is thus a developmentally vulnerable period during which youth may be especially motivated to pursue social rewards and not yet fully capable of restraining themselves. So, I think that we are about to see what really could be an enormous turning point in the history of social media, where it is not enough to simply say how human beings behave in the world is how they're going to behave online, and we can't, as a company, be responsible for that. When clearly these companies knew how much danger a lot of these kids were being put in by the very features that made creating a social network and being connected to social media, that those made possible. And so I think that we're going to, at the very least, see some very interesting and damning testimony. We're going to get a chance to see the leaders of these companies actually asked about what they knew and when they knew it, in a way that may or may not be satisfying as a public spectacle, but will be very interesting as a matter of precedent. And I think we could be turning toward what I have long argued we should be turning toward, which is this idea of getting beyond, in the United States, the notion of simply physical harm and financial harm, which is the only things we tend to regulate in this country, and instead getting to the notion of behavioral harm, that we are sophisticated enough as a set of companies to really change behavior and to do so in a way that can be extremely dangerous and damaging to human beings. We saw that with cigarettes, in which people like to blame it on human beings for being addicted to cigarettes. We like to blame the addict in this country. And instead, beginning to realize, there are some behavioral adjustments through technology that go far beyond people's ability to control and wind up doing long-term damage to them throughout their lives. And I think this could be another one of those. That shift, that bellwether that we are possibly seeing here, I think is going to be a historic moment. I think this really could be that. And as a result, I'm going to be spending most of my time paying attention to this stuff as we get through these trials in the next few weeks. The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.